The conference room fell silent as Rebecca Sterling walked through those glass doors for the first time in 8 years. The same woman who once told me I'd never be anything more than a cashier was now sitting across from me, her resume trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't recognize me at first. Success has a way of changing how people see you. But I remembered every word she'd said that night in 2016, every sneer, every dismissive laugh. Now she needed something from me, and I was the only one who could give it to her.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. It all started at Riverside Community College in Portland, Oregon. I was 22, working double shifts at Megamart to pay for my business classes. My name is Jessica Chen, and back then, I was just another struggling student trying to make something of herself. The fluorescent lights of that grocery store had become as familiar as my own reflection, harsh, unforgiving, and constant. Rebecca Sterling was different from the other customers. She swept through those automatic doors like she owned the place, always in her perfectly pressed blazers and clicking heels that announced her arrival from 3 aisles away. She worked at Pinnacle Financial, one of Portland's most prestigious investment firms, and she made sure everyone knew it. The first time our paths crossed was on a Tuesday night in March. I was restocking the cereal aisle when she appeared at the end of my row, tapping her manicured nails against her phone case. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that severe bun that screamed middle management, and her lips were pressed into that thin line I'd come to know so well. "Excuse me," she said, not bothering to look up from her phone. "Where do you keep the organic quinoa?" I pointed toward aisle 7. "Right over there, ma'am, 3rd shelf from the top." She finally looked at me then, and I caught something in her expression, a flicker of recognition, though I couldn't place from where. Her pale blue eyes scanned my name tag, then my face, then back to the tag. "Jessica," she said slowly, like she was testing how my name felt in her mouth. "You look familiar. Do I know you from somewhere?" I shook my head. "I don't think so." But she kept staring, and then her face lit up with that particular kind of cruel satisfaction that comes when someone thinks they've figured out a puzzle. "Wait a minute. Jessica Chen, you're in Professor Martinez's strategic business planning class, aren't you?" My stomach dropped. Rebecca Sterling wasn't just a customer. She was a guest lecturer who'd spoken to our class the previous semester about corporate finance. She'd been impressive that day, commanding the room with stories about million-dollar deals and boardroom negotiations. I'd even asked her a question about market analysis during the Q&A session. "Yes," I said quietly, "I remember your presentation." She laughed then, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Right, right. You asked about emerging markets or something equally naive." Her eyes traveled from my uniform polo shirt to the pricing gun in my hand. "So this is what you're doing with that business degree, stocking shelves?" Heat crept up my neck. "I'm still in school. This is just temporary while I finish my degree." "Temporary," she repeated, and there was something almost pitying in her voice. "Honey, let me give you some free advice from someone who's actually made it in the business world. Not everyone is cut out for corporate success. Some people are just meant to be service workers." I wanted to tell her about my 3.8 GPA, about the business plan I'd been developing for my capstone project, about the internship applications I'd been submitting. Instead, I just stood there, gripping that pricing gun like it might anchor me to something solid. She continued, seemingly encouraged by my silence. "I see kids like you in my office all the time, bright-eyed, full of dreams about climbing the corporate ladder. But the real world isn't a classroom, Jessica. It takes a certain kind of person to succeed in high-level business. It takes breeding, connections, natural instincts that you either have or you don't." The words hit me like physical blows, but she wasn't finished. "I mean, look at you. You're what, 22, 23, still working retail while trying to get a degree from a community college? No offense, but Pinnacle Financial doesn't exactly recruit from Riverside Community. We look for people from Stanford, Wharton, maybe Columbia if we're feeling generous." My hands were shaking now, but I kept my voice steady. "Everyone has to start somewhere." "Some people start at the bottom of Mount Everest," she said with a shrug. Others start at base camp. And some people, no offense, start in the parking lot and never even see the mountain. She glanced at her Rolex. Look, I'm sure you're a nice girl, but let's be realistic here. You'll probably bounce around retail jobs for a few years, maybe become a shift supervisor if you're lucky. But corporate leadership, C-suite positions, that's just not in the cards for someone like you. The cereal boxes seemed to blur at the edges of my vision. Someone like me? Someone without the right background, the right education, the right presence. She gestured vaguely at my uniform. I'm not trying to be cruel, Jessica. I'm being honest. Better to adjust. Your expectations now, then face disappointment later. You'll never amount to anything more than what you are right now. The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Other customers moved past us in the aisle, their carts squeaking and conversations blending into white noise. But I felt completely isolated in that moment, like Rebecca and I were the only two people in the entire store. Well, she said finally, checking her phone again, I should get going. Thanks for the direction to the quinoa. She started to walk away, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Jessica, when you do accept reality, don't take it personally. The world needs cashiers and stalkers too. There's no shame in knowing your place. And then she was gone, her heels clicking away toward aisle 7, leaving me standing there among the Cheerios and Frosted Flakes, with her words echoing in my head like a curse I couldn't shake. I finished my shift that night in a daze. Every time I scanned a barcode or counted change, I heard her voice. You'll never amount to anything. Every time I restocked a shelf or helped a customer, I saw that pitying smile, that dismissive wave of her manicured hand. When I got home to my tiny studio apartment at 1:30 a.m., I sat on the edge of my secondhand couch and stared at my business textbooks stacked on the coffee table. For the first time since starting college, I wondered if she was right. Maybe I was kidding myself. Maybe all those late nights studying financial models and marketing strategies were just an elaborate form of self-delusion. But then I thought about my parents, who had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but hope and determination. I thought about my mother working 16-hour days in a factory so I could have opportunities she never did. I thought about my father learning English from library books so he could help me with my homework when I was little. And I got angry. Not the quick, hot flash of anger that comes and goes, but the slow-burning kind that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. Rebecca Sterling didn't know anything about me except what she could see on the surface. She didn't know about the nights I'd spent tutoring other students in accounting, or the business proposal I'd written that Professor Martinez had called exceptionally innovative. She didn't know about the recommendation letter from my economics professor that described me as one of the most naturally gifted strategic thinkers I've encountered in 15 years of teaching. All she saw was a uniform and a name tag, and she decided that was enough to define the limits of my entire life. I pulled my laptop onto my knees and opened up my business plan, the one I'd been working on for months, refining every detail, researching every angle. It was for a consulting firm that specialized in helping small and medium-sized businesses optimize their digital presence and operational efficiency. I'd identified a gap in the market where traditional big consulting firms were too expensive and too rigid for smaller companies, but existing small consultants lacked the technological infrastructure to deliver comprehensive solutions. As I read through my market analysis and financial projections, Rebecca's words faded into background noise. She was wrong about me, and someday I was going to prove it. Not to win her approval or to get some kind of validation, but because I knew what I was capable of, and I wasn't going to let someone else's limited imagination define my future. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to build something that would make Rebecca Sterling eat every single word she'd said to me in that grocery store aisle. I was going to become exactly the kind of person she thought I could never be. I just had no idea that 8 years later, she'd be the one asking me for a job. The next 18 months were a blur of calculated moves and relentless execution. I quit Megamart 2 weeks after my encounter with Rebecca, despite needing every dollar from that job. My savings account had exactly $847 in it, but I'd landed a paid internship at Morrison & Associates, a mid-tier consulting firm downtown that specialized in helping struggling restaurants turn their operations around. The internship paid barely above minimum wage, but it gave me something invaluable, real client experience. While my classmates were writing theoretical case studies, I was sitting in actual boardrooms watching seasoned consultants dissect failing businesses and rebuild them from the ground up. My supervisor, David Morrison, was a gruff former Marine who had zero patience for academic theory but could spot operational inefficiencies from across a crowded dining room. He became my unofficial mentor, though he'd probably laugh if he heard me call him that. "Chen," he'd say, studying a restaurant's monthly P&L statements, "what's jumping out at you here?" I learned to see patterns in the numbers but told stories. How food costs that seemed reasonable on paper were actually bleeding a business dry because of poor inventory management, or how labor scheduling that looked efficient was actually driving away customers during peak hours. My breakthrough came 6 months into the internship. Morrison had assigned me to help with a struggling Italian restaurant called Bella Vista in the Pearl District. The owner, Maria Rossini, was 3 months behind on rent and ready to close her doors. The numbers were brutal. She was losing money on every table she served. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But during my third visit to analyze their dinner rush, I noticed something everyone else had missed. The kitchen was backing up orders, not because they were understaffed, but because their point-of-sale system was routing orders inefficiently. Appetizers ordered at the same time as entrees were being fired simultaneously, creating bottlenecks when servers had to wait for both courses to be ready before delivering anything to the table. It was a simple workflow problem with a simple solution, but it was costing them an average of 12 minutes per table during peak hours. In a restaurant with 42 seats, those 12 minutes translated to losing nearly 30 covers per night. I spent 3 days mapping out their entire service flow and designing a new POS configuration that would optimize kitchen timing. When we implemented it, their table turnover increased by 40% within the first week. Maria went from losing $8,000 a month to turning a profit of $3,200. Morrison was impressed, but what really caught his attention was how I'd identified the problem. "Most consultants look at restaurants like spreadsheets," he told me over coffee one morning. "You looked at it like a machine with moving parts. That's rare." That's when he made me an offer I wasn't expecting. Morrison & Associates was expanding into retail consulting, and he wanted me to spearhead the new division after I graduated. The starting salary was $52,000, more money than I'd ever imagined making right out of college. But I turned him down. Not because I didn't appreciate the opportunity, but because those late nights analyzing Bella Vista's operations had sparked something bigger in my mind. I'd been tracking small business failure rates in Portland, and the pattern was clear. Most companies that failed weren't failing because of bad products or lack of demand. They were failing because of operational inefficiencies that could be identified and fixed with the right systems and expertise. The problem was that hiring traditional consulting firms was prohibitively expensive for small businesses, and the few affordable consultants in the market were generalists who couldn't deliver the specialized technical solutions these companies actually needed. I saw an opportunity to build something different, a consulting firm that combined affordable pricing with sophisticated analytical tools, specifically designed for small and medium-sized businesses. Instead of charging the $300 per hour rates that firms like Pinnacle Financial commanded, I could deliver comparable results for a flat monthly fee that growing businesses could actually afford. I spent my final semester at Riverside Community College building the framework for what would become Chen Solutions. I developed proprietary assessment tools that could diagnose operational problems in half the time traditional consultants required. I created standardized improvement packages for the most common issues I'd identified. And I designed a service model that could scale efficiently without sacrificing quality. My business plan was 127 pages long by the time I submitted it as my capstone project. Professor Martinez gave it an A+ and asked if he could use it as an example for future students. More importantly, he connected me with 3 local business owners who agreed to become my first clients. The day after graduation, I used the last $1,200 in my savings account to rent a tiny office space above a coffee shop on Burnside Street. It was 200 square feet with a leaky ceiling and a radiator that sounded like it was trying to communicate with aliens, but it was mine. My first client was a boutique fitness studio called FlexCore that was hemorrhaging members despite having excellent trainers and equipment. The owner, Sarah Kim, was spending $4,000 a month on Facebook ads that were generating plenty of clicks but almost no conversions. I spent a week analyzing their entire customer acquisition process and discovered the problem wasn't with their advertising. It was with their onboarding sequence. People were signing up for trial memberships but never returning after their first visit because there was no systematic follow-up process. I designed an automated email sequence that guided new members through their first month, scheduled their sessions, and connected them with accountability partners. The result was a 300% increase in trial to membership conversions within 8 weeks. Sarah's monthly revenue jumped from $12,000 to $31,000. Word spread quickly in Portland's tight-knit small business community. By the end of my first year, Chen Solutions had 14 regular clients and a waiting list. I'd moved into a proper office downtown with 3 employees, and my personal income had reached 6 figures. But success brought new challenges I hadn't anticipated. As my client base grew, I realized that many of the operational problems I was solving had similar root causes across different industries. Companies were making the same mistakes over and over again, just in slightly different contexts. That insight led to my next evolution. Instead of just fixing problems for individual clients, I started developing software tools that could prevent those problems from occurring in the first place. I partnered with a developer named Marcus Webb who specialized in business automation systems, and together we created a suite of management tools specifically designed for growing companies. The software launch was a turning point. Within 6 months, we had over 200 businesses using our platform, paying monthly subscription fees that provided steady, predictable revenue. More importantly, the software allowed us to help far more companies than we could ever serve through traditional consulting alone. By my 3rd year in business, Chen Solutions had expanded beyond Portland. We were working with clients in Seattle, San Francisco, and Denver. I'd hired a team of 12 people, including several consultants who'd left bigger firms to join us. Our annual revenue had topped $2.8 million. I was featured in the Portland Business Journal as one of the city's rising stars under 30. The article mentioned my background, graduating from community college, starting with less than $1,000 in savings, and positioned me as an example of entrepreneurial grit paying off. I kept that article framed in my office, not out of ego, but as a reminder of how far I'd come from that night in the cereal aisle at Megamart. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if Rebecca Sterling had seen it, whether she remembered the conversation we'd had, whether she'd recognized my name. I was about to find out. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning in February, 7.5 years after my encounter with Rebecca Sterling. I was in my corner office on the 20th floor of the U.S. Bancorp Tower, reviewing quarterly projections with my CFO, when my assistant knocked on the door. "Jessica, I have Harrison Mitchell from Pinnacle Financial online too. He says it's urgent." I knew the name. Mitchell was Pinnacle's managing partner, the kind of power player who made front-page business news when he sneezed. Chen Solutions had grown to the point where we occasionally competed for the same mid-market clients, but we'd never had direct contact. "Mr. Mitchell," I said, picking up the line, "what can I do for you?" His voice carried that particular strain that comes from trying to sound casual while discussing something decidedly not casual. "Miss Chen, I'll cut straight to the point. We're interested in acquiring Chen Solutions. Would you be open to a conversation?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Pinnacle Financial, Rebecca Sterling's company, wanted to buy my business. I arranged a meeting for the following week, more out of curiosity than any real interest in selling. Chen Solutions had become something beyond what I'd originally envisioned. We now employed 43 people across 4 offices. Our software platform served over 1,200 businesses nationwide, generating $18 million in annual recurring revenue. The consulting division alone was handling projects worth $50,000 to $500,000 each. More importantly, we'd proven that my original thesis was correct. Small and medium-sized businesses didn't need expensive, traditional consulting approaches. They needed efficient, technology-enabled solutions that could diagnose problems quickly and implement fixes systematically. We'd helped our clients increase their combined annual revenue by over $340 million since inception. The meeting with Pinnacle's acquisition team was scheduled for 2 p.m. in their downtown headquarters, a gleaming 30-story tower that screamed old money and established power. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a charcoal gray Armani suit that had cost more than I used to make in 2 months at Megamart. Mitchell met me in the lobby personally, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were taking this conversation. He was exactly what I'd expected. Silver-haired, perfectly tailored, with the kind of confident handshake that suggested he'd never doubted his place in the world. "Miss Chen, thank you for coming. I've been following your company's growth with considerable interest." He led me to a conference room on the 28th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows over the Willamette River. The view was spectacular, but I was more interested in studying the team he'd assembled. His CFO, his head of mergers and acquisitions, 2 vice presidents I didn't recognize, and sitting at the far end of the table, Rebecca Sterling. She looked older, more polished than she had 8 years ago. Her blonde hair was shorter now, styled in a sophisticated bob that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. She wore a navy blue dress with pearl earrings, and her makeup was flawless. She looked successful, established, untouchable. She also looked uncomfortable. Our eyes met for just a moment when I walked in, and I saw a flicker of something, recognition, uncertainty, before she quickly looked down at her tablet. She clearly remembered me, but she was hoping I didn't remember her. Mitchell launched into his presentation. Pinnacle was looking to expand their service offerings to include mid-market consulting, and they believed Chen Solutions was the perfect acquisition target. They'd done their homework. They knew our revenue numbers, our client retention rates, our growth projections. They even knew about the 3 competing offers I'd received from other firms in the past year. "We're prepared to offer $47 million for full acquisition," Mitchell said, sliding a folder across the table. "Cash deal, with retention packages for key personnel. You'd stay on as president of the new mid-market division." It was a generous offer, more than generous. It would make me wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined when I was stocking shelves and dreaming of something bigger. But I wasn't here for the money. "That's very flattering," I said, barely glancing at the documents. "But I'm not interested in selling." The room went quiet. Mitchell looked genuinely surprised, which probably didn't happen to him often. "Ms. Chen, perhaps you'd like some time to review the terms. We're also open to discussion on—" "It's not about the terms," I interrupted. "Chen Solutions isn't for sale, not to Pinnacle, not to anyone." I could see Rebecca shifting in her seat at the far end of the table. She'd been silent throughout the entire presentation, but now she was paying close attention. Mitchell pressed on for another 20 minutes, sweetening the offer, adding incentives, trying different angles to convince me to reconsider. I listened politely, asked a few technical questions to keep the conversation going, but my answer remained the same. Finally, he leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone who wasn't used to hearing no. "Ms. Chen, I have to ask, is there something specific about Pinnacle that concerns you? Some reason you wouldn't want to partner with us?" I glanced down at Rebecca, who was now staring intently at her hands. This was my moment. "Actually, yes," I said. "I have some concerns about Pinnacle's judgment when it comes to identifying talent and potential." Mitchell frowned. "I'm not sure I understand." "Let me tell you a story," I continued, settling back in my chair. 8 years ago, I was a business student at Riverside Community College, working nights at Megamart to pay for my classes. One evening, I had an interaction with one of your employees, someone who took it upon herself to explain to me that people like me weren't cut out for corporate success, that I'd probably spend my career bouncing around retail jobs, and that I should adjust my expectations accordingly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees.
Rebecca had gone very still, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. This employee told me that Pinnacle only recruited from elite universities, that I lacked the right background and breeding for high-level business. She was quite emphatic that I'd never amount to anything more than what I was at that moment, a cashier scanning barcodes and stocking shelves. Mitchell looked confused, but I could see comprehension dawning in the eyes of a couple of his team members. Rebecca's discomfort was now visible to everyone in the room. Miss Chen, Mitchell said carefully, I'm not sure what relevance this has to our current discussion. The relevance, I said, standing up and gathering my things, is that any organization that employs people with such spectacularly poor judgment about talent assessment probably isn't the right partner for Chen Solutions. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to face the table. Oh, and Mr. Mitchell, you might want to have a conversation with Miss Sterling about proper due diligence. If she'd taken 5 minutes to research my background before dismissing me as retail help, she might have saved your company from the embarrassment of trying to acquire a business they once considered beneath their notice. Rebecca finally looked up, her face now flushed red beneath her foundation. Our eyes met across that polished conference table, and I saw something I'd never seen from her before: fear. Thank you for your time, I said to Mitchell, then walked out of Pinnacle Financial's headquarters for what I assumed would be the last time. I was wrong about that part. 6 months after the Pinnacle Financial meeting, Portland's business community was buzzing with rumors. Word had gotten out about Pinnacle's failed acquisition attempt. Not the details, but enough to spark speculation. Some said Chen Solutions had turned down a massive buyout offer. Others whispered that there had been bad blood between the companies. I didn't comment publicly, but the rumors actually helped my business. Being the company that Pinnacle Financial couldn't acquire gave us a certain credibility with potential clients who were tired of being ignored by the big consulting firms. Our client base grew by 30% that year, and we opened our 5th office in Austin, Texas. But the real story was what was happening inside Pinnacle's walls. I learned about it through Marcus Webb, my software development partner, who had a friend working in Pinnacle's IT department. Apparently, the failed acquisition had triggered a comprehensive review of their mid-market strategy. The company's board was asking hard questions about why they'd missed the opportunity to get into the fastest-growing segment of the consulting market.
More specifically, they were asking why Rebecca Sterling, who led their business development team, had never identified Chen Solutions as a potential competitor or acquisition target until we'd already become too successful to ignore. The internal investigation revealed what I'd suspected all along. Rebecca had been aware of my company's growth for over 2 years, but had consistently dismissed us in her quarterly reports as a local firm serving small clients with limited growth potential. She'd recommended that Pinnacle focus their expansion efforts on acquiring established East Coast competitors instead. Her miscalculation had cost Pinnacle millions in lost revenue and market position. By the time they tried to acquire us, we were no longer just a regional success story. We were a national threat to their business model. The board's patience with Rebecca's judgment was wearing thin, especially when they discovered that 3 other mid-market firms she'd deemed not worth pursuing had been acquired by competitors for substantial sums. Then came the economic downturn of early 2024. It started with a series of high-profile corporate bankruptcies that sent shockwaves through the financial sector. Pinnacle's traditional client base, large corporations with massive consulting budgets, began cutting costs aggressively. Companies that had been spending $2 million annually on strategic consulting were suddenly questioning whether they needed any outside advisors at all. Within 6 months, Pinnacle's revenue dropped by 40%. They were forced to lay off nearly a third of their workforce, including several vice presidents who'd been with the company for over a decade. Rebecca Sterling survived the first round of cuts, but her position was precarious. The business development team she'd built was now responsible for replacing massive amounts of lost revenue, and the strategy she'd championed, focusing exclusively on enterprise clients, was proving to be a liability in the new economic environment. Meanwhile, Chen Solutions was thriving. Our focus on small and medium-sized businesses turned out to be a strategic advantage during the downturn.
While large corporations were slashing consulting budgets, smaller companies were actually increasing their investment in operational efficiency. They needed to do more with less, and our technology-enabled approach was exactly what the market demanded. We signed 47 new clients in the first quarter of 2024 alone. Our software platform, which automated many of the analytical processes that traditional consulting firms handled manually, allowed us to serve clients at price points that remained attractive even during tight economic times. The contrast between our company's performance didn't go unnoticed in Portland's business circles. Forbes published an article titled "How Small Business Consulting Survived the Downturn" that featured Chen Solutions prominently. The piece mentioned our origins as a bootstrap startup founded by a community college graduate and highlighted how we'd outmaneuvered larger, more established competitors. That article landed on Harrison Mitchell's desk with a sticky note from Pinnacle's chairman of the board. Why didn't we see this coming? Mitchell's answer was a private meeting with Rebecca Sterling that lasted less than 15 minutes. By the end of that conversation, she'd been given 60 days to find a new position, either within the company or outside it. Rebecca spent those 60 days frantically networking, reaching out to contacts at competing firms, exploring every possible option to salvage her career. But the consulting industry is smaller than people realize, and word of her miscalculations had spread. No one wanted to hire someone who demonstrated such poor strategic judgment at such a critical time. With 2 weeks left on her deadline, Rebecca did something she'd never had to do in her entire career. She started applying for jobs that were beneath her previous level. Senior analyst positions, junior partnership tracks, anything that would keep her in the industry she'd spent 15 years building her reputation in. That's when she saw the job posting for Chen Solutions. We were hiring a senior business development manager to lead our expansion into the Pacific Northwest market. The position required someone with experience in B2B sales, knowledge of the consulting industry, and the ability to build relationships with C-level executives. The salary range was $85,000 to $120,000, depending on experience. For Rebecca, who'd been earning $180,000 plus bonuses at Pinnacle, it represented a significant step down. But it was also one of the few positions she'd found that would allow her to stay in Portland and maintain some semblance of her professional identity. She submitted her application on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days before her deadline at Pinnacle. Her cover letter was carefully crafted to emphasize her years of experience in business development while downplaying the circumstances of her departure from Pinnacle. She positioned herself as someone seeking new challenges in the dynamic small business sector. I was in Seattle that week, meeting with a potential client, when my HR director called to tell me about the application. "You're not going to believe this," Jennifer Martinez said, "but Rebecca Sterling from Pinnacle Financial just applied for the senior BD position." I'd been expecting this call for months, ever since the rumors about Pinnacle's internal troubles started circulating. I'd even wondered if Rebecca would be desperate enough to apply to Chen Solutions, though part of me had doubted she'd swallow her pride to that extent. "Send me her resume," I said. Reading through her application materials was surreal. Her resume was impressive on paper. 15 years of progressively increasing responsibility, a track record of successful client relationships, an MBA from USC. Her references included senior executives at major corporations and consulting firms. But I knew something her resume didn't reveal: her fundamental inability to recognize potential when it didn't fit her preconceived notions of what success should look like. Still, I was curious to see how she'd present herself, whether she'd acknowledge our history, how she'd handle the power dynamic that had completely reversed since our encounter in that grocery store. I called Jennifer back. "Schedule her for an interview, next Tuesday at 2 p.m. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. And Jennifer, make sure she knows the interview will be conducted by me personally." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jessica, are you sure this is a good idea?" I stared out the window of my Seattle hotel room at the city skyline below, thinking about that night 8 years ago when Rebecca Sterling had stood in a grocery store aisle and told me I'd never amount to anything. "It's perfect," I said. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical February weather in Portland. I spent the morning in strategy meetings, but my mind kept drifting to the 2 p.m. appointment. At 1:45, I positioned myself in my office where I could see the reception area through the glass walls that separated our executive floor from the main workspace. Rebecca Sterling arrived exactly on time. She stood at the reception desk in a black wool coat, her hair pulled back in that same severe style I remembered, though now I could see threads of silver at her temples. She carried herself with practiced confidence, but there was something different, a tightness around her eyes, a careful way she held her shoulders that suggested someone trying very hard to project control. My assistant guided her to the conference room adjacent to my office. Through the connecting door, I could hear the soft murmur of polite conversation about traffic and weather, standard pre-interview small talk, but I caught an undercurrent of nervous energy in Rebecca's voice that she was working to suppress. At exactly 2 p.m., I walked into the conference room. The moment she saw me, Rebecca's carefully composed expression faltered. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. For just an instant, I saw the same woman who had dismissed me in that grocery store aisle, but now she was the one who needed something from me. "Miss Sterling," I said, settling into the chair across from her, "thank you for coming in today." She recovered quickly. I had to give her credit for that. "Miss Chen, thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I'm excited about the opportunity to discuss how my experience might benefit Chen Solutions." Her voice was steady, professional, but I noticed her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and she was avoiding direct eye contact. "I've reviewed your resume," I said, opening the folder in front of me. 15 years at Pinnacle Financial, that's quite a track record. Tell me, what's prompting you to explore opportunities in the small business consulting space? It was a softball question, the kind any experienced candidate should have a polished answer for. But Rebecca hesitated just a beat too long. "I've always been interested in working with growing companies," she said finally. "There's something energizing about helping businesses reach their potential. At Pinnacle, I primarily worked with established corporations, but I think there's tremendous opportunity in the mid-market space." I nodded, as if this was a perfectly reasonable answer. "Interesting perspective. And what draws you specifically to Chen Solutions?" "Your company has built an impressive reputation very quickly," she said, warming to safer ground. "The technology-enabled approach to consulting is innovative, and I believe my experience in business development could help accelerate your growth." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. "You know, Miss Starling, I have to say I'm curious about something. When did you first become aware of Chen Solutions as a company?" The question hung in the air between us. Rebecca's composure slipped just slightly, a tiny tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible pause before she answered. "I'd heard of your company through industry networks," she said carefully. "Portland's business community is quite close-knit, as I'm sure you know."
That's true, I agreed. In fact, I believe we've met before, haven't we? Now the silence stretched longer. Rebecca's face had gone pale, and I could see her weighing her options. Deny it, admit it, try to deflect. She chose deflection. "I may have encountered your company name in various business contexts over the years," she said vaguely. I opened my laptop and pulled up a document I'd prepared specifically for this moment. "Actually, let me refresh your memory. 8 years ago, you gave a guest lecture in Professor Martinez's strategic business planning class at Riverside Community College. I was a student in that class." Rebecca's breathing had become shallower. She was trapped now, and she knew it. "After your presentation, we had a conversation. Do you remember what you told me?" "Miss Chen, You told me that people like me weren't cut out for corporate success, that I lacked the right breeding, the right connections, the right presence. You said I'd probably bounce around retail jobs for a few years, maybe become a shift supervisor if I was lucky." Each word landed like a physical blow. Rebecca's professional mask was cracking, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. "You also said," I continued, "that I should adjust my expectations because I'd never amount to anything more than what I was at that moment, a cashier scanning barcodes and stocking shelves." "Miss Chen, please,
You told me that people like me weren't cut out for corporate success, that I lacked the right breeding, the right connections, the right presence. You said I'd probably bounce around retail jobs for a few years, maybe become a shift supervisor if I was lucky. Each word landed like a physical blow. Rebecca's professional mask was cracking, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. You also said, I continued, that I should adjust my expectations because I'd never amount to anything more than what I was at that moment, a cashier scanning barcodes and stocking shelves. Miss Chen, please, Here's what I find fascinating, I said, cutting her off. You had such strong opinions about my potential based on seeing me in a Megamart uniform, but somehow, during your 15 years as Pinnacle's business development expert, you never noticed that this same worthless cashier was building a company that would become your biggest competitive threat. Rebecca was trembling now, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the conference table. In fact, I continued, according to my sources, you actively dismissed Chen Solutions in your quarterly reports, called us a local firm serving small clients with limited growth potential. That miscalculation cost Pinnacle millions in lost market share and contributed to the strategic failures that led to your current situation. I made a mistake, Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. I was young. I was arrogant. You were 34 years old, hardly young, and arrogance suggests you had something to be arrogant about. But what you demonstrated wasn't superiority, it was profound ignorance about how to identify talent and potential. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd built everything she'd told me I'd never achieve. Miss Sterling, I want you to understand something. The reason you're sitting in this chair right now, applying for a job that pays half what you used to make, isn't because of market conditions or bad luck. It's because you fundamentally lack the judgment required for strategic business leadership. When I turned back to face her, tears were running down her cheeks, carving paths through her carefully applied makeup. Please, she said, her voice breaking, I need this job. I have a mortgage, car payments, student loans. I've been looking for 6 months and nobody will hire me. I know I was wrong about you. I know I misjudged everything, but please don't let my past mistakes ruin my future. For a moment, sitting there with tears streaming down her face, Rebecca Sterling looked exactly like what she'd become. A middle-aged woman whose arrogance had finally caught up with her, begging for mercy from someone she'd once considered beneath her notice. I sat back down and looked at her for a long moment. Miss Sterling, I said finally, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. She looked up hopefully, desperately. 8 years ago, you told me I'd never amount to anything. Today, I'm going to return the favor. I closed her file and slid it across the table. Chen Solutions will not be offering you a position. Not this one, not any other. In fact, I'm going to personally ensure that my colleagues in the industry know exactly why. Rebecca's hope crumbled. Please, you can't. I can, and I will. You see, Miss Sterling, the business world you thought you understood so well operates on something you clearly never learned: respect for potential, regardless of where you find it. You failed that test 8 years ago, and you've been failing it ever since. I stood up and walked to the door. My assistant will show you out. And, Miss Sterling, the next time you're tempted to tell someone they'll never amount to anything, remember this moment. Remember who's sitting where. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving Rebecca Sterling alone in that conference room with the wreckage of her own making. Justice, I discovered, tastes exactly like I thought it would. The weeks following Rebecca's interview brought an unexpected weight I hadn't anticipated. I'd imagined that moment of vindication would feel purely satisfying, like closing a book that had been left open too long. Instead, I found myself thinking about her tears, the desperation in her voice, the way her hands had shaken as she begged for a second chance. Not because I regretted my decision, I didn't, but because seeing someone's world collapse in real time, even someone who deserved it, was more sobering than triumphant.
Marcus Webb noticed the change during our weekly strategy meeting 3 weeks later. We were reviewing expansion plans for our Denver office when he set down his coffee and looked at me directly. "You've been different since that interview," he said. "Want to talk about it?" I'd told Marcus the basics of my history with Rebecca, but not the details of how the interview had ended. "It's complicated," I said. "Revenge usually is." That stopped me short. It wasn't about revenge. Wasn't it? Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Look, I'm not judging. If someone had said those things to me, I'd probably want them to eat their words too. But you've been carrying this around for weeks now." He was right, though I hadn't wanted to admit it. The confrontation with Rebecca had closed one chapter of my story, but it had opened another that I wasn't sure how to write. 2 months later, I got my answer in the form of an unexpected phone call. "Miss Chen, this is Dr. Patricia Nguyen from Portland General Hospital. I'm calling about Rebecca Sterling." My stomach dropped. "Is she okay?" "She's stable now, but she was brought in yesterday evening after a suicide attempt. She's asked to speak with you." The drive to the hospital felt surreal. Portland General's psychiatric wing was nothing like the sterile corporate environments I'd grown accustomed to. The walls were painted in soft blues and greens, meant to be calming, but they only emphasized how far Rebecca had fallen from the polished conference rooms where she'd once held court. Dr. Nguyen met me at the nurses' station. She was a small, serious woman with kind eyes who spoke in the measured tones of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news. "Miss Sterling has been struggling with severe depression since losing her position," she explained as we walked down the corridor. "The financial stress, the career setback, the social isolation, it's a common pattern we see with professionals who experience sudden reversals. Yesterday, she took an overdose of sleeping pills. Is she going to be okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally, that's going to take time and professional help." Dr. Nguyen paused outside room 314. "She's mentioned you several times since she's been here. She seems to believe that speaking with you might help her find some closure." Rebecca looked smaller in the hospital bed, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with the pale blue gown or the IV line in her arm. Her hair hung limp around her face, and the confidence that had once defined her presence was completely absent. "Jessica," she said when she saw me. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You came." I pulled a chair close to her bed. "How are you feeling?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it, like someone who tried to kill herself because she couldn't face the consequences of her own actions. "So, not great." We sat in silence for a moment. Through the window, I could see the city skyline where both our offices had once been, where mine still was. "I've been thinking about that night at Megamart a lot," Rebecca said finally. "Not just since the interview, but for years. It haunted me even before I knew who you'd become." "Why?" "Because I knew, even as I was saying those things, that they were wrong. Not factually wrong. I had no way of knowing what you'd accomplish, but morally wrong. Cruel. I was taking out my own insecurities on someone who didn't deserve it." She turned to look directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before: genuine remorse. I was 34 years old, climbing the ladder at a prestigious firm, making more money than my parents ever dreamed of. But I was miserable. Imposter syndrome, they call it now. I was constantly terrified that someone would discover I wasn't as smart or capable as I pretended to be. Rebecca's voice grew stronger as she continued. "When I saw you in that store, working hard, going to school, building something, it triggered something ugly in me. Here was someone who had less than I did, but seemed more genuine, more grounded. So I tried to tear you down to make myself feel better." "Rebecca, let me finish, please. I need to say this." She struggled to sit up straighter in the bed. "Everything you said in that interview was true. I did dismiss your company in my reports. I did fail to recognize the threat you represented. But it wasn't because I didn't see your potential. It was because I did see it, and it terrified me." This was not the conversation I'd expected to have. "What do you mean?" I mean that every quarterly report where I downplayed Chen Solutions was me hoping you'd fail. Every time your company achieved another milestone, it reminded me of my own moral failure that night in the grocery store. I couldn't acknowledge your success without acknowledging what I'd done. Rebecca reached for a tissue from the bedside table, her hands steadier now than they'd been during the interview. The worst part is that my judgment was compromised by my guilt. I made bad strategic decisions for Pinnacle because I couldn't separate my personal shame from my professional responsibilities. I cost my company millions of dollars because I was too proud to admit I'd been wrong about a 22-year-old business student. "So, what are you asking me for?" I said quietly. "Nothing," she replied immediately. "I'm not asking for a job, forgiveness, or a second chance. I'm asking you to understand that destroying me won't undo what I said to you 8 years ago. It'll just create more damage." She was right, and I knew it. But admitting it felt like giving up something I'd earned. "Rebecca, you humiliated me. You tried to crush my dreams before I'd even had a chance to pursue them. Why should I care about your damage?" "You shouldn't," she said simply. "You don't owe me anything, but you owe yourself the chance to move forward without carrying my mistakes with you." Dr. Nguyen knocked softly on the doorframe. "Miss Chen, I'm sorry, but visiting hours are ending soon." I stood up, unsure of what to say. Rebecca's attempt to reframe our conflict as something that was hurting me as much as her felt manipulative, even if there might be truth in it. "Jessica," Rebecca said as I reached the door, "I know you'll probably never see me again after today, but I want you to know, what you built with Chen Solutions is extraordinary, not because you proved me wrong, but because you proved yourself right. You should be proud of that." I drove home through the Portland evening, past the Mega Mart where this all began, past the Pinnacle Financial Building where I'd turned down their acquisition offer, past my own company's headquarters where 43 people were building careers based on the vision I'd refused to abandon. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't thinking about Rebecca Sterling's opinion of my potential. I was thinking about what I wanted to do with the success I'd achieved, and whether holding on to old grievances was the best use of the power I'd worked so hard to build. The answer, I realized, was more complicated than revenge had ever been. 3 months after Rebecca's hospitalization, I found myself standing in front of the Portland Community Foundation's annual gala, an event I'd attended every year since Chen Solutions became profitable enough to matter. Tonight felt different, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The theme was Second Chances, Investing in Human Potential, and the keynote speaker was supposed to discuss how successful professionals could mentor those from non-traditional backgrounds. The irony wasn't lost on me. Inside the ballroom, Portland's business elite mingled over champagne and carefully curated conversations about philanthropy. I recognized most of the faces: CEOs, managing partners, nonprofit directors. People who'd once looked through me were now eager to discuss partnership opportunities and board positions. Halfway through the cocktail hour, I spotted a familiar figure near the silent auction tables. Rebecca Sterling stood examining a donated art piece, wearing a simple black dress that looked expensive but not flashy. She'd lost weight since the hospital, and her hair was different, shorter, less severe. She looked smaller, somehow, more human. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment I considered turning away. Instead, I found myself walking toward her. "Jessica," she said when I approached. No surprise in her voice, just a quiet acknowledgement. "How are you? Really?" She considered the question seriously. "Better. Therapy helps. So does having realistic expectations about my life for the first time in years." "Are you working?"
Part-time consulting for small nonprofits. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work, helping organizations that actually need what I can offer. She gestured toward the auction display. I volunteer here now, too. Turns out I'm decent at grant writing when I'm not trying to impress anyone. Before I could respond, the lights dimmed and a voice announced that dinner was being served. Rebecca started to move away, but I touched her arm. "Would you like to sit at my table? I bought a full one, but half the seats are empty." She looked genuinely surprised. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Probably not, but I'm curious what you think about tonight's keynote topic." Dinner conversation at our table was typical nonprofit gala fare, polite discussion of charitable tax strategies and upcoming fundraising events. Rebecca contributed quietly, asking thoughtful questions about the foundation's scholarship programs and mentorship initiatives. She seemed genuinely interested, rather than just networking. When the keynote speaker took the stage, I watched Rebecca's reaction more than I listened to the presentation. Dr. Maria Santos, a Harvard Business School professor, spoke about breaking down barriers for first-generation college students and professionals from working-class backgrounds. The most successful mentoring relationships, Dr. Santos said, are built on the recognition that potential exists everywhere, but opportunity does not. Our role as established professionals is to bridge that gap, not to gatekeep based on superficial markers of success. Rebecca was paying close attention, occasionally taking notes on her napkin. When Dr. Santos mentioned the importance of acknowledging past failures in judgment, I saw Rebecca's hand pause over her pen. After the presentation, as guests began to filter out, Rebecca and I found ourselves alone at the table. "She made some good points," I said. "She did, especially about acknowledging failures." Rebecca folded her napkin carefully. "Jessica, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd been different that night? If I'd been encouraging instead of cruel?" I'd actually thought about this many times, though I'd never admitted it to anyone. "Sometimes, but honestly, Rebecca, I think you gave me exactly what I needed." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that your dismissal lit a fire in me that supportive words might not have. You forced me to prove something, not just to you, but to myself. Without that anger, that determination to show you how wrong you were, I might have taken the safe path. I might have accepted David Morrison's job offer and spent my career working for someone else's vision instead of building my own." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "So, in some twisted way, my cruelty helped you?" "Your cruelty revealed your character, not mine. But my response to it, that was all me. And it taught me something important about the difference between people who see potential and people who only see limitations." I pulled my business card from my purse and wrote something on the back before sliding it across the table to her. "What's this?" "The contact information for our head of community outreach. Chen Solutions just launched a mentorship program for business students from community colleges and state schools. We're looking for volunteers who understand what it's like to have their potential underestimated." Rebecca stared at the card. "You want me to mentor young professionals?" "I want you to be the person you wish you'd been 8 years ago. The person who sees a young woman working her way through school and says, 'That's impressive. Tell me about your goals,' instead of 'Know your place.'" "Jessica, I don't understand. After everything I did, everything I cost you?" "You didn't cost me anything," I interrupted. "You revealed who you really were, and I chose how to respond. That choice led me exactly where I needed to be." I stood up to leave, then paused. "Rebecca, I spent 8 years defining myself in opposition to what you said about me. But Chen Solutions wasn't built to prove you wrong. It was built to prove me right. There's a difference." "What difference?" "One is about you. The other is about me. And I'm done making my success about you." 6 months later, I received an email from Rebecca with the subject line, "Update from the Trenches." She'd been working with the mentorship program for 4 months and had been paired with 3 students: a single mother studying accounting at Portland Community College, a veteran transitioning to business school, and a first-generation college student majoring in entrepreneurship. Her email was brief but genuine. "I wanted you to know that Maria, the accounting student, just landed an internship at a mid-sized firm downtown. She credited our mock interview sessions with helping her feel confident enough to apply. I thought you'd want to know that your program is working. Thank you for giving me the chance to be part of something positive. Rebecca." I deleted the email without responding, not out of longhassiness, but because some conversations are meant to end. Rebecca's journey toward becoming a better person didn't require my validation, just as my success had never required her approval. That evening, I walked through Chen Solutions offices after hours. 47 employees now, across 6 locations. On the walls were framed photos of client success stories, testimonials from business owners who'd grown their companies with our help, articles about our innovative approach to scalable consulting. But what struck me most was a small whiteboard in our break room where staff members had written goals and inspirational quotes. Someone had added a new one that week. Potential is everywhere. Opportunity should be too. I smiled, thinking about that terrified 22-year-old who'd stood in a grocery store aisle 8 years ago, clutching a pricing gun while someone tried to convince her she'd never amount to anything. She'd been wrong about so many things, about what success would feel like, about how satisfying revenge would be, about whether proving others wrong was worth the energy it required. But she'd been right about the one thing that mattered most. She'd refused to let someone else define the limits of her potential. And in the end, that refusal had built something bigger than either of us could have imagined back then. Not just a successful company, but a legacy of seeing possibility where others saw only limitations. Rebecca Sterling had told me I'd never amount to anything. What she'd actually done was challenge me to amount to everything I was capable of becoming. The difference between those two things turned out to be worth $50 million, and counting. But more importantly, it turned out to be worth becoming the kind of person who sees potential in a grocery store cashier and says, "Tell me about your dreams," instead of "Know your place." That transformation, from someone who needed to prove others wrong to someone who could help others prove themselves right, was the real victory. And unlike revenge, it never tasted better. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.